So let's get started. I'm going to stop the slideshow and ask our speakers to turn on their cameras. I'll do a quick introduction of myself, although that's always a little bit uncomfortable for me. So I did write it out. It sounds a little egotistical, though. I am a nationally I'm Jennifer Curry Janhke, and I'm a nationally recognized digital accessibility expert and educator with over 20 years of experience supporting post-secondary institutions across Canada and internationally. I currently serve as the principal educator at accessibilityconsulting.ca, and I'm an active member of accessibility legislative standard committees. It's a great honor to introduce our panel today, and I appreciate Juan asking me to be the moderator for the panel. So I'd like to introduce Pina. She is the founder of Acquium Global Access, Inc. She is a seasoned accessibility strategist with over 30 years of international experience advising executives and organizations on inclusive policies, standards, and disability advocacy through both professional expertise and lived experience. Thank you, Pina, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Jennifer Chadwick is a globally engaged digital accessibility strategist and inclusive design coach. Jennifer advises cross-functional teams, has co-authored Canada's ICT procurement toolkit, and contributes to international accessibility standards and thought leadership. Hi, Jen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Jen.
And finally, Juan Olarte. He is a seasoned accessibility expert with over 20 years of experience. He immigrated to Canada from Colombia in 1999, and he has a deep awareness of the challenges faced by people living with disabilities. Juan is the founder and CEO of Digitally Accessible and Aliverse. Juan, thank you so much for asking us to be here. You're on mute, Juan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, so for everybody, our aim and objectives today are that by the end of the session, we're hoping to leave here with a clear understanding of what accessibility maturity means and why it matters, easy to follow steps to improve your organization's accessibility practices, tips for making accessibility part of your team's regular workflow, and insights into how inclusive design can spark innovation and improve results. Just so that we're all on the same page, I'm just going to give a little bit of a definition of what a maturity model is, and then I'm going to go into some questions for our panel members. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as we go. So an accessibility maturity model is a structured framework that helps organizations assess, plan, and improve their accessibility practices over time. It outlines progressive stages from awareness to integration to leadership across key areas like policy, technology, training, and culture. An accessibility maturity model enables teams to identify where they are, where they want to be, and how to get there through measurable and actionable steps. And that's what we're going to ask our panel about today, is how do we do that? So if it's okay, Pina, I'm going to start with you. Can you provide us with a quick background on maturity models and what the advantages or differences are between a self-assessment checklist model that assesses a company's maturity versus an interview-based assessment?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. That's a good question. Maturity models, when we talk about accessibility maturity models in particular, people think that this is a new practice. This is something that, has just come up in the last few years. But in reality, maturity models have existed for a number of years. In fact, some people, who have been in business for a long time may recognize the CMMI, which is the capability measurement model indicator framework that existed back in the 1980s. And accessibility maturity models really kind of took that in as a baseline to develop something that is specific to accessibility requirements. So it follows a very similar methodology where, as you mentioned, it's a tool that allows you to really develop a plan that leads to progression within a particular area of your organization or the entire organization. There are many different ones out there in the market now. They're the one that, some of the ones that are mostly known are the Microsoft Evolution models. There's the G3ICT and the International Association of Accessory Professionals have their own models. There's one from Level Access. So there are a number of maturity models out there, and each of them have strength in particular areas. When you think about the difference between what is a self-assessed model versus an interview-based one, the self-assessed model is basically an online tool that allows you, to answer a series of questions related to how your organization is doing or where your organization is. So let's remember that a maturity model is a snapshot in time. It's all about where are you right this moment? Do you have policies in place? Are these policies, do they include inclusive and accessibility requirements, for instance? Are there processes, and are these processes documented? Are people trained in accessibility, for instance? So it will address a number of different areas within your processes and evaluate on a level of 1 to 5, where you are, 1 being at the chaotic stage, and as you progress, you become more of a mature and sustained and potentially even a leader and an excellent in accessibility. But the self-assessment is often done by one person on their own, on their own perspectives. Check boxes are filled in, or open questions. And potentially in some organizations, different people will fill out different areas of that particular questionnaire. When we talk about an interview-led maturity model, it follows a similar process, except that what it does is we have open discussions with leaders. Very specifically, we bring together a number of leaders or leads within the departments and organizations, and we really have a number of questions that are, again, based on those indicators, which is policies, procedures, communications, digital, and so on and so forth. But we feel that those conversations allow us to observe things differently in a way that, sometimes even the body language tells us a lot about what's going on in an organization. It's very interactive. All of the questions, all of the sessions are set up in a safe environment, so people are allowed to say what they feel, what they think, without any fear of repercussions. And then we collect all of that data and align it and do some aggregation to different indicators, and come back with a rating on each of those indicators, and provide some recommendations that will allow the organization to move from one level to the next. So one is more interactive, the other one is more static. One will allow you to have those interpersonal discussions, the other one may not so much, but both are good and both are great tools. And depending on where the organization, depending on the complexity of the organization, one can be just as well suited for the organization as the other.
Thank you, Pina. Can I ask, are there any advantages or disadvantages to the self-assessment versus the interview-based?
I think one of the biggest one, I think when you're thinking about the self-assessment, as I said, it's done in silos, and sometimes you have those biases, come into play. We all have biases, so they will come into play and often reflected. I think what often happens with the interviewed ones is that you have the ability to also notice where, so for instance, we'll have interviews with a number of individuals, and one will say, we have this policy, or we have this project, or whatnot practice in place already, and suddenly, you have that aha moment where the next person may say, we didn't even know this existed. So it's a more collaborative and an awareness sometimes for the organization. It really also builds it gives you the opportunity to build a little bit more of a team and collaborative effort when you're talking about accessibility. So it opens those doors when you're having those in-person interviews which they can be virtual or not, but those team interviews vis-a-vis doing your self-checks. You have to also remember that the interview assessments may take a little bit longer and maybe a little more expensive, while the self-check can be quicker. So for organizations, sometimes if they, it's easy for them to do these self-checks, maybe very quick, but then you still, I think businesses still benefit from taking those results and helping the organization identify how they're going to get to that next step. And I think those conversations, regardless of whether you do a self-check or whether you do an interview-led one, you still need that consultation to help you get to how do you turn all of this, these results, these findings into a tactical plan that can be implemented and executed.
That, like those pros and cons and, sort of the advantage to the organization. Is there any advice that you would have for which path towards maturity an organization should go? Like, is it based on, perhaps how far along in their digital accessibility journey they are? Should they, if they're just at the very beginning, would a self-assessment be the way to go versus somebody who's been at this for longer? Would they use a more interview-based assessment, or does it matter? Is there other kind of categories or criteria that they should look at?
That's a great question. And I mean, I think that when you are starting and you are doing a self-assessment and you're using the online, any online assessment tools, it really does create an awareness for those companies that are just starting on what they need to consider, what they need to think about. So, even if you're just at the starting point, doing a self-check creates that awareness of things that you may not have thought about as part of your program. So I think it's very, it's just as beneficial. The interview, we do them more for larger organizations because they are more complex, because there are more silos to in many organizations and people to deal with. And the communication, which is a big element in any of these maturity assessments, is that it really creates that that awareness around communication. We need to communicate more. We need to let people know what we're doing. And so having those people brought together in a team creates that environment, or helps create a little bit more of that open communication and collaboration among teams, right? So we're finding that with larger organization, whether you're starting or whether you're somewhere in between, the interviewed is a good practice to have if you're starting as a smaller company, or if you're starting, to kind of just help create that awareness. You can start with the self-assessment that is self-check, and again, it'll help you create, a basic plan as to where to start and how to start.
Fantastic. And then my final question for you before we move on is, what pre-assessment requirements would you recommend be gathered before beginning an accessibility maturity model?
I think it's really important to get buy-in from your leadership, right? You have to be able to have leadership that supports this work, that understands why it is you're needing to do this work, and create that safe space, as I mentioned before, to have those conversations. The biggest barrier to overcome when you're thinking about doing these types of things is really letting people know that, and making them feel comfortable that this is not a judging exercise. This is not about judging whether you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong. It's really about having those conversations so that one can help you identify where the gaps are, where the barriers are. The other thing we do, especially for, organizations that may be along the way, we look at artifacts. We look at, what is it that they have in regards to policies, processes, what standards, if there are standards they're following, how are they doing that? We look at training plans and we look at their tools. What tool, and are their tools accessible? So when you think about employment as an example, very specifically, we're going to look at that employment journey and try to fit that through to kind of see, where the barriers exist or where some of the changes need to happen. I think the last point I want to make regarding maturity models help make systemic and cultural change. That's what this is about. It helps with your change management processes to help you move from, as I said before, from where you are to where you want to be. And an organization doesn't necessarily have to be at an advanced level to do well. You can, depending on your organization, you could be at a level 2 where you have a team in place and they are responsible for accessibility just as well as, and do as well as somebody who's at a level 4, who perhaps has data collection and measurement. Depending on your organization, there are different levels that are most suited for you. So I think it's also important to keep that in mind.
That is really important. And one of the things I think that really resonated with me that you talked about was that participation of not only the employees, but the leadership team as well. And before I move on to Jen, I wanted to just say, did you have anything you wanted to add about how that maturity assessment really helps to connect with the user experience? Because I think that's a theme that we'll see throughout all of your discussions and points.
I agree. That is a very good point. And when we talk about maturity assessment, to your point, we want to make sure that our teams are diverse, right? So when you're assigning the teams that are going to work on your maturity assessment, you want to have senior leadership participate because it's important for leadership to understand what that user experience for people who may have diverse abilities, who may face different challenges. And frequently, we associate accessibility and maturity models to the needs of persons with disabilities. But in reality, when we think about accessibility is for everyone. And so what you're going to find through these conversations is a lot of conversations around like, yeah, for myself as a person, trying to access this tool, this is the challenge I have. Or if I'm trying to design something, this is the challenge I'm experiencing. And that person may or may not have a disability, right? So it really fosters that space where people with diverse needs come together and work together without, as I said before, facing any discrimination or facing any repercussions for sharing their genuine and open experience with everyone.
I agree. And I think that, Jen, that's something that you probably really focus on when you look at sort of how do you take that information that, Pina's now acquired, and how do you ensure that that information and those goals are operationalized across the teams and the departments, really thinking about that user experience.
Yeah, no, hi everyone. So thanks, Pina, for laying down such a fabulous framework of all the things that you touched upon that need to be assessed. Policies, day-to-day operations, roles and responsibilities within each department. And you're speaking to leaders as well as the employees doing the work day to day, whatever business organization or your business goals. So yeah, I take all those goals that a maturity model will have, process to policy to culture change, to actually doing different things that you're doing now to introduce new tasks, or sort of stopping certain things that you're doing, not necessarily in any intentional way, but if we're causing any barriers to internal employees, to external customers, to those we serve with digital and built environments, all those things, yeah, as Jen mentioned, we're gonna operationalize them. Those I really like, and Pina and I, we've worked together and successfully so in the interview model of the maturity, because it unlocks people's thoughts and they can be open about their own employment experience, where physical as well, like visible as well as invisible disabilities and those needs can be openly discussed. The other thing that comes about that is like an acknowledgement of the current culture, which we also is key to change and movement and that maturity progression forward. If I feel unsafe at work, if I'm not sure if I'm asking for accommodations, I'm going to get them or not. We're doing what we can to improve the quality of the workplace for existing folks, as well as be prepared from the technical, attitudinal, and cultural perspective to start employing people with disabilities in the next phase, right? Or and at any time, any given moment. So yeah, we have those responses, whether it's a self-reflection, the self-assessment is good too. It gives us our goals, or the interview sort of unlocks people's sort of yeah, Pina talked about and Jen talked about commitment or sort of collaboration as well as like a shared goal to fix things. And then yeah, I've worked on taking those things and just translating those goals into actionable tasks. So some of the key things that you can do is to continue those conversations, as well as incorporate people with disabilities, either your own colleagues who have come to the forefront to say, I can openly speak about what I need, or you can look at personas, bring a couple of things. What we really, really want to do is, so I'll start with that piece first, where people with disabilities are with lived experience, being employees, being end users, bringing them into shared demonstrations of the tool, like the software tools they'll use, their needs day to day. Those sort of that training can be a really open discussion and ask me anything. It really demystifies what this whole accessibility thing is, what accommodations are, what people are people, what they need every day to do their job. Bringing people in and having those sort of training sessions per department, per role, is really important. So that's been a fundamental success piece. And from there, you actually look at exactly what or how someone uses assistive technology at work. So it's demystified, and you can add that to your checklist of things that you're going to do in your organization. So I'll just stay on working with people for a moment. The other thing that those interviews actually do at the maturity level assessment level is to kind of open up the ability to do something I found really successful at one company, which is people, so staff internally, create a user guide to themselves that you can share with your colleagues. Here are my values. Here's how I operate day to day. Here are my needs and preferences for software. Here's how if I have an invisible disability such as dyslexia or ADHD or anxiety, here's how I prefer to receive feedback from my manager, right? Here's how I prefer, here are the hours I prefer to work, things like that. So getting very down to the nitty-gritty about what people need in the workplace. I like that. I found that successful. I like the idea of incorporating that into everyone's individual sort of employee status that's recognized at every level of an organization. And I know it's sometimes we have back to work, and we have things that are sort of restricted from business reasons, but being able to ask people internally sets that precedent. So if you are going to hire people with disabilities to become part of your culture, your tribe, and your workplace, that's already a practice. It's a document. So going back to operations and day-to-day things, as Pina mentioned, there's the way that we act, our policies, our internal and external policies and processes per department, our job descriptions, how we think inclusively about people at work and our needs. The roles and responsibilities just sort of internally in each department, in your own role, knowing what people with disabilities need in the workplace every day and what you're going to do to make a website or a document or the environment itself, whether it's technical or cultural, different. You really need to break that down to tasks. So what I like to do is, again, have those open conversations, or I'll come in and consult with an organization to say, who are all the folks on your team? What's the maturity level? We already know that from the assessment. And what are the tools and resources that you need? And what are the things that we can change every day that we aren't doing to the things that we are doing and every day you may have to take on one additional responsibility. For instance, if it's a document, you may have to run the accessibility checker to make sure that that content is accessible internally and externally for users. That's just one thing that you didn't do yesterday that you're going to incorporate into your own existing skill set and your own existing processes. So bringing it down. And what I'm saying is recognizing that accessibility is everyone's sort of responsibility, part of everyone's skill set, is a really exciting and empowering way to have that culture, establish that culture and establish that open door for people with disabilities to come in and be part of your staff. So it's sort of like after we have our goal, I kind of break down those day-to-day tasks from that goal into what we're going to change. So there's something called a stop, start, and continue exercise that you can do within your department. So stop anything that we know is causing barriers, which is coding our website inaccessibly, or making our communication documentation inaccessible. Stop it. Start making those changes day to day in our processes, and then continue. And I really like what Pina said, which was uncovered, is that one department in an organization really may be really, really mature, and they've done it already, but you didn't know that. You're sort of siloed over here in another department. So sharing that's a continue. Let's not only do what we need to do in our department, but continue on and learn from each other. Yeah, so I've talked about user guides, and also incorporating your commitment to, as a staff member, your commitment to and your needs, as well as the day-to-day operations into your job description for everyone is key. So as we document that, it becomes less of a monolith, one department, one person to take care of, and it's just sort of incorporated and embedded in everything we do. So build that into your job descriptions for folks. Yeah, and then I think what I'm talking about essentially is just the other thing I want to share specifically about HR's processes is asking first. So I'll stop and I'll say what I'm going to say about that, but then I think other folks in the panel may have had experience, but making sure that HR asks people what they need, whether it's explicitly in a job interview, in the way that they present themselves or the job description online when you're hiring people. For a start, having alternative methods of hiring people, because everyone is different and people have different needs. To be being aware that every policy is an open door to say, let me know what you need, rather than the other way around. Yeah, I think that's quite a few things to chew on. I'll just send it back to my panel. Anything else to add, or Jen, if there's anything else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, I really loved what you talked about with regards to the roles and responsibilities, that accessibility is everybody's responsibility, but not everybody needs to know everything. So I was just wondering, like you talked about HR and the importance of, making sure everybody understands that they can indicate what they need for accessibility for their own personal reasons. But not everybody comes in with the skill in order to make things accessible. So I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit about training and the importance of training once those areas have been identified through the maturity model.
Yeah, no, it's the key. So I'll just speak a little bit of, I think those folks like Pina, you've had an incredible, some more extensive experience to working and doing the maturity model assessment with HR. But when it comes to operations, I still advocate, as we probably started with interviews, we still advocate for training of HR in understanding people with disabilities are people, and that a lot of technology, especially I'm in the digital world, a lot of software and technology just unlocks that ability, right? That's what people are aware of. That's what they use at home. That's what they've been using for years. That is their MO. So when you come, and actually HR needs to recognize that an organization with its attitude or like lack of awareness, as well as, me, from the technical perspective, the software pieces or the documentation pieces, if those are inaccessible, you're actually causing the barrier. So HR, what I'm saying ultimately is just let's have those training sessions side by side with people who have the needs to demystify and actually remove some of the fear that comes with misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Pina, anything else to
I
add?
was gonna just add to your point on training because I think it's so important. And just as you mentioned, the basic training for HR practitioners to understand how technology works, assistive technology works, sometimes opens an incredible opportunity for conversations related to accommodations, right? If HR understands the tools and how those tools are used, they are better prepared to help the individual get the necessary tools. But the other thing too is that HR also needs to understand, particularly when we're talking about some uh, integrated tools, some applications that some things may be accessible on the surface, may not necessarily be accessible throughout. And again, they would not know that unless they actually have an opportunity to see that lived experience, that journey with that individual, right? And I think that that's really also an important factor in making sure that people are trained. And if the HR is involved in buying tools, also need to
Yes.
know about, procurement, accessible procurement, and know how to make sure that the tools that they're buying, the tools that they're implementing, they work very closely with the designers, the developers to make sure that those tools are accessible. Because too many times, you're buying tools and that you think are accessible or going to work. And once they're integrated and customized to the organization's needs, they are no longer accessible. And I think those are some of the things that I think from an HR perspective, the more they are aware through training, through communication, the better they are equipped to help an individual have a seamless employment experience.
Yeah, I'll just say 1000%. That is one of the key barriers. You can do your best. You have the best intentions with your goals and your maturity level. You're really on your way to levels 2 or 3. But one of the wrench in the works, as it could be, is exactly what Pina mentioned, is the software that's out there in the market. So much of it, as we all know, in the digital world, is not accessible, and or if you don't, one of the most successful things you can do is place that sort of requirement for WCAG compliance or standards compliance for those, and usability and user experience compliance with those tools that you're procuring for HR software, career site. And then I'm just going to switch quickly to and give a shout out to marketing tools, social
Yes.
media, all those things, and even basic websites. So Pina touched upon a critical piece, which is we have ways, and we can share some of those ways, those kind of questions you can ask back to a vendor. Make sure that the tools that you're going to use in your organization, that everyone's going to be using, from staff to external folks to people you're going to hire, you feel empowered to be able to push back on a vendor that says, "Hey, I can give you the best price for this software." You ask if it's accessible. Otherwise, you you're really hindering your own ambitions. Sorry, did someone say something?
So
I thought there was a call.
please
Something.
please feel free to put any questions in the chat. We will absolutely call on you. And I think Jen and Pina, you've both hit on such important pieces there with regards to, again, that user experience, the importance of procuring items in order for them to be used by individuals within the organization and possibly your customers and clients as well. So, Juan, I'm going to come to you and ask if there's anything you wanted to add to that discussion. Or are there any things that have been overlooked or overlooked elements in building accessibility into an organization that you could touch on?
Yeah, so I do want to quickly mention a few things. So I completely agree with Pina in terms of HR understanding the role of technology. And I think it's going to be in two ways. A, what kind of tools does the organization use? But also B, what kind of assistive technology is certified for the specific organization? And the reason why I'm saying that is because banks, oftentimes they're huge, they have thousands of employees, and because they do have so many employees, they're going to require to go through certification. So, for instance, assistive technology like JAWS and assistive technology like NVDA, both of them are screen readers, but maybe one of them is going to be certified to work with. So, if you're going to be hiring somebody who is blind and they only have worked with NVDA and they haven't worked with JAWS, you're going to have an issue in terms of, oh, what does the training look like? Are we going to have to train this person in terms of utilizing a different type of assistive technology that have been certified and perhaps is going to work with most of the internal applications. So that's really important. Now, the other point in terms of what are some of the things that are missing from the maturity level, one of the things I do is also comes down to digital accessibility. That's going to be websites, apps, or any kind of documents, and how we can actually try to integrate them or integrate accessibility early on within it. A lot of times what I like to do is also introduce a framework for accessibility. Really is going to talk about the different legislations you have to cover, whether you're in Canada, the US, or in Europe, you're going to um, have specific legislation that your company is going to have to comply with. Organizations also have their own internal policies when it comes to accessibility. So it's very good to align with legal in terms of what they do and how they do it and what you need to do. But also go back and take a look at the different tools you're going to have. We're going to be talking about assistive technologies. So we talk about two, JAWS and NVDA, but also we might look at VoiceOver, which is in the Mac. What about assistive technologies in mobile devices? Expanding beyond that, what about assistive technology for people who are visually impaired, who are colorblind, for those ones who have some kind of cognitive disabilities? And what is the interoperability between those technologies, browser, and the different applications they're going to be working with? Then really look into how you're going to be developing an application. What I like to tell people is, A, you're going to want to document everything. Oftentimes, you're going to be using design systems, which are great because they're going to give you specific information about different elements and can be reused in an application. For instance, if you're going to use an accordion or a navigation items, it's best if you have the code, the design, but also introduce accessibility within that specific requirement and let people know how it is accessible. That way, when a developer is going to be using that specific code, they know exactly, oh, I'm not going to remove X or this kind of code because it's going to remove accessibility, but also the testing team, the product owners know exactly how it's going to be accessible. And make sure that you document all of that information under one place. I'm just going to stop here and see if there's any other question or something like that both Jen and Pina would like to add.
We're good. I think, as you mentioned, I think it's important for the developer, but most importantly, two things. I think it's also equally important to have the requirements at the very beginning and read them through the entire process, right? So from the concept, you're starting to have a concept of a tool, of a product that you want to develop. You want to have people with diverse disabilities and share those ideas on how to, you're not going to do you're going to do it for any other product. You're going to do market research. You're going to want to know how people are going to use your tool. So you're going to do the same here. And so you're going to take it from the concept to the design to the development. And even if you're doing testing as you're developing, you still want to do a quality control check at the end anyhow, just like you do for any other application or any other product. So I think
I
when
100% agree with that.
right,
Yeah, one thing that I want to add to it. Let's say you're creating an application where you're going to be swiping left to right to do a specific action. So a lot of times the requirement is going to be, as a user, I'm going to swipe left to delete a specific message, or swipe right to do something else, or swipe up and down. But at this point, they're actually forgetting those users who may not be using or may not be able to
That's
use
right.
typing option, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, also an alternative. And if they're
Yep.
going to be using specific assistive technology, how they're going to be able to interact with that tool. That
Yep.
specific element in there is going to
Mhm.
provide extra requirements.
Yep.
Better early on than at the very end, where you're like, oh, we don't know how to make this accessible, and they're going to have band-aids on it.
Yeah. So Juan, I have two, just gonna say, so speaking for that's was exactly my week. And I didn't, this is wonderful because I actually tested a mobile app with specifically what Juan talked about. There's a swiping left and right to
Mhm.
move through a carousel.
Mm.
But I'm testing it with turning, so it was iPhone turning voiceover. So the screen reader, a built-in screen reader that people use on, and that changes the functionality of that swipe. So I shared that back in a report, or like I'm going to have a discussion with the development team to demonstrate that. So one of
Mhm.
the things I said earlier is, yeah, just bringing people in. Um, with with lived experience or those assistive technology users, and demonstrating that makes a huge difference. And one other thing that Juan mentioned is, yeah, design systems. So this is my world. I work with designer. I'm a former designer myself, designers, developers, content authors, and QA, those sort of testing those things. And I'm working within a design systems team at the moment. And my contribution to the design system team, so design system itself, which is all the components, like a component library of all the things you use to build a website. That's all documentation. So we actually did some testing, as Pina and Juan mentioned, with people with disabilities navigating that particular component. We recorded it, and then what I've done is taken a 1 to 2 sort of minute clip of that demo
Mhm.
and embedded it right into the design system documentation.
Yeah.
So when a designer goes to that, button component library button page, list of all the components, they see a why, how, and they actually see a demonstration of how. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
so many great ways that you can
And there's
take
nothing,
those
yeah, to your,
those user interviews and all that feedback you're getting and incorporating it into
yeah.
documentation. Yeah, sorry, Pina, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, Jen, you and I have worked together, as you said, on these things for a long time. Juan, yourself, there is nothing that resonates more to a client when they see users use their products and services, right?
Mhm.
Nothing like, as we said, we do it for marketing, but we tend to not include persons with disabilities or persons with diverse abilities into that group of testers or evaluators and I think that that's the biggest mistake organizations do, right? It's a key element in the process. And if they can address that, then they can ensure that, the product is accessible, right? So, there's so many, and especially now in a time where everything is digital, everything, right? If I can't operate, if there's no push button on my toaster, I can't make toasts. Right? I don't care
Yeah.
no matter how pretty the toaster looks and how great it works with an app and whatnot, but if there's no button that I can use, I'm not having toast, right? So,
Yeah, and the greatest
Pina, that
evolution within inclusive design, sorry, is in the
yeah,
design world is
yeah,
just thinking like beyond the fully abled,
yeah.
fully happy path user. That's been the biggest evolution in sort of the design world. I'm not going to say it sounds like I know everything, but that's what I've experienced at least,
There
is
Mhm.
recognizing that people use different technologies. It's You have to don't think of just one user, but up to five different people and five different. And once you incorporate or include or think about those as part of your user experience, like accessibility, and access can be user experience.
I
It's people.
think
People are people. Whether you're an employee or a customer. Yeah.
I
Sorry,
think
Juan.
that's really, no, I was gonna say I think that's really powerful because there's two scenarios. I may say, like, if we go back to the example you were providing, Jen, something is not working, I'm going to go and talk to the developer. Hey, this specific carousel doesn't work with the swipe. But there's many things, or I want to say there's so much that the developer is going to be able to do. At this point, you're going to be putting band-aids because the experience has already been predefined. But again, this is why it's so important. I would like to say, even bring those people with different type of abilities early on in the development life cycle at the point of understanding what those interactions are going to be. So if you're going to say, I want to swipe left or right to do a specific action, understand, hey, maybe somebody who is using a screen reader on a mobile phone is not going to be able to do it. Are we going to be able to provide an alternative for them? And if so, what is it going to be? At that specific point, you're going to be creating requirements that the development team is going to try to implement and the testing team is going to test. What I want to be able to say, and I want to be very careful, developers, they do have a lot of say when it comes to developing an accessible application, especially if they're coding according to standards. But at the same time, if the specific interaction has been predefined, they won't be able to do miracles. So research, including people with disabilities early on, understanding what their needs are and the technologies they use is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money and make sure that you have a more accessible application.
Yeah.
This is such a great conversation. I don't mean to cut you off, Pina. I'm just mindful that we only actually have 9 minutes left, if you can believe it. The time has gone by really quick. I do want to get to our kind of takeaways. And I mean, I put the question in the chat that if anybody has any questions about their maturity model they want to ask the panel, please let us know. Just before I get to our takeaways, Juan, if you could give like a very, very short answer to this final question, is how do you maintain accessibility momentum when priorities shift or leadership changes?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand what those gains or those successes were. Really keep them somewhere so organizations can see. Keep track of everything that you have done in terms of accessibility. Keep a record, and so it's going to be easier for whoever is going to come into the organization to say, "Hey, this project was very successful when it comes to implementing accessibility because they did A, B, or C, and this is what we can do to replicate that." So really have the information where everybody can see it, what the success was, because people, especially big organizations at the top, they say, hey, you know what, this was successful. We want to make sure we replicate it across.
Can I answer that too, Jen, just very quickly, based on what we've seen?
Very quickly.
And I think if those tasks, if those use of tools, if those conversations, of all these great things that we're doing day to day are incorporated into your job description, if a new management comes along, it's hard to kind of just unmarry that and pull that out. So, or like we've already built time and effort to add accessibility to our scope, because as Pina and Juan mentioned, we did it at the beginning. It's hard to descope that, or it's hard to derail that if it's the way that we do things around here, and that's precisely what we're trying to do with our maturity models. So if a shift in management lacks care, or they want to shift the priorities, it's already embedded. It's easier to push back.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again just so that we can go through the takeaways. And then Glenn, I'm going to come to you and ask you about your question. I don't think the full question was in the chat, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask. But just going over to Pina quickly, if you could identify the actions to take away.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the last one. I mean, people can read, this whole conversation we've talked about, it, including leadership and getting budget and making sure you have teams that are engaged. But I think the last point on this slide is really taking action on the results of the maturity model. And that's so important because very frequently people will do a maturity model and then it kind of sits there and dusts away. They get too overwhelmed and whatnot. And the one thing that I always tell people, start with one thing at a time. Do not boil the ocean. And the maturity model allows you to do that by informing you on how to build a tactical plan. And I think that I want to leave people with that thought that, it's a snapshot with some guidance, some recommendations, but it's up to you as an organization to prioritize and figure out how and where you're going to start. Start with one thing and move on to the next. And all of that will kind of become a systemic, will create a systemic and cultural change within the organization.
Fantastic. And Jen, what about you and your takeaways? You're on mute, Jen.
It's a great segue from Pina to say that I've been in organizations where they want to do all of the stuff at once and they have to do it under the gun, under a deadline. I also want to say that with a maturity model, you can go at your own pace. So we want to make cultural systemic change. It takes time. Lay into that and just understand that it does. And what if I do training or create a program where we sort of operationalize all those tasks, I'll sometimes ask them as the team, how much can you do in a month, or how many tasks do you think you can do in 2 or 3 months to reach that level? So I've got the list of actions to take. I wanted to share because all of these can be actionable tomorrow, well, I'd say, hopefully, but also there's resources I can share where you can actually take the next step. So assigning roles and responsibilities into daily processes. There's something called the accessibility roles and responsibilities mapping. It's a framework that you can apply to that. And that's what I do quite a bit. Conducting the stop, start, continue exercise, as mentioned, to figure out where we are doing things wrong and stop those, and then start new tasks. Conduct disability etiquette and needs walkthrough exercises with HR and staff. That's part of that training to demystify and really understand people. Train HR to adopt a policy of ask first. Hold those assistive technology demo sessions led by people with disabilities. Allow staff to create an employee user guide if you feel comfortable and if there's that culture exists to communicate your needs, and encourage new employees to do that when you onboard people with disabilities. And then the other last one was sort of setting one-on-one meetings between yourself as an employee and your manager to regularly check in. Are your needs still the same? Do you need any more tools? Is there are there any cultural needs or cultural changes that have affected you, things like that. Thanks.
Thank you. And Juan, do you want to go through your takeaways?
For sure. Integrate accessibility development life cycle early on and ensure you include people with disabilities to better define requirements. Keep a library of different components or elements you're going to be using, oftentimes a design system. That way you know what is going to be developed and you can carry on in other projects. Keep documentation under one roof. So it's not going to be spread among your email, different folders. If you can find it quickly, other people within organizations are going to be able to implement it very quickly. And again, include people with disabilities into what you're doing every single stage. Early on, super important, but also as you're developing an application, guide them through what the application does and let them provide feedback. It's going to be really important. I want to just to provide a quick example. I was working in big project where they tried to do the entire application accessible, and there was one specific component that was part of a third-party tool, payment processing, but that payment processing wasn't accessible. And so it doesn't matter if you have a whole application that is going to be accessible if a user is not going to be able to pay. So make sure that accessibility is included early on, even at the time of procurement, when you're going to be negotiating with other companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to I know we're out of time, but we're happy to stay on a little bit longer. Glenn, you had a question about branding. Did you want to open up your mic and camera and ask the panel that?
Yeah, sure. I'm just getting the video back up. Unable to start video, it says.
That's okay. You can go ahead and
That's
ask.
fine.
Yeah.
I know you. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Hello, Glenn. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. I took the course with Jennifer a couple of years ago, and through Mohawk and Owlware. And so I've always looked to have accessible content be what I'm producing. And now I am at the point where I'm a sales and marketing manager, and we have an outside web development studio doing our stuff. And the first thing when they were doing this rebrand was they set up a page, and I took a look at it. And the first thing I did was I opened up my Paciello color checker, and I saw that it didn't pass on anything. And I said, we've got to darken this text so that it has the correct ratio. And the first thing they popped back to me was, well, we can use a accessible plugin through WordPress.
Mm,
And that's
right.
always a problem because it creates issues, as I think everybody on this knows, with speech to text and all sorts of different problems that can be introduced through one of these plugins. Like it's just not best practice. So I said, no, that's not what I want you to do. For now, I want you to do this. What I'm asking, darken the text. So what I'm saying here is, what would you suggest in a situation like that to get away from?
Yeah, I'm going to pass it over to the panel.
I'm just going to.
But I did want to just say thank you to Jan for the resources,
Yeah,
Glenn.
Jan.
Jan put some great overlay fact sheets and some information about Accessibee's finds in the chat. So take a look at those.
Yeah, that's
But
great. Thank you.
Pina or Juan, did you
Very
want to
quickly,
answer?
because I have to jump and I'll let the rest of the panel. At the end of the day, they have to comply. It is legislation, and then you have to let them understand. If you don't comply, there's specific elements that you're going to be putting the company at a risk. Help them understand that, and then at the same time, you want to create a much easier time for people with disabilities, and if possible, not having depend on a third-party tool that may also create accessibility obstacles.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think people have to understand overlays, as you mentioned, doesn't fix the problem, right? In the end, if they're not going to do this, they're leaving 1 in 4 people out of the market.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's really important. The overlays also don't address very efficiently people experiencing neurodivergence, right?
Right.
And as an example, as again, information statistics speak loud to people sometimes. And when you say you're in an educational context, we've done a maturity assessment recently. An organization, 95% of their accommodation requests were related to neurodivergent needs. So that overlay is not going to help.
No, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's the point I was trying to put across to them, because I know what those statistics are, and I know that it's the largest growing demographic in Canada. So as a person with an invisible disability myself, I'm very much aware of all of this, and I've been around disability my whole life. But you and I can get into that later. I'd love to speak to you on
for
your
sure.
own,
But Juan's got it right. It's the law.
It is law, exactly. And that's something that I made very clear to them at the outset of all of this, is that we have the AODA in now. And so, this is something that needs to be done. I really appreciate all of your thoughts on this, but I will let it go for now because I know we're out of time. Thank you so much, everyone who's been a part of this. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you to WINS for inviting Jennifer, Pina, Juan, and myself to have this discussion. If you have any further comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to connect.